They're the successful dramatists of 18th century Paris, and their busts stand in the foyer of the French National Theatre. That theatre which for 100 years did so much to promote good sense and humanity. And here is the wittiest and most intelligent of them all, in fact, at a certain level, one of the most intelligent men that have ever lived, Voltaire. He's smiling, the smile of reason. You know, there's a character called Fontenelle, a French philosopher who, by living to be nearly 100, bridged the 17th and 18th centuries, the world of Newton and the world of Voltaire. He held a position known as perpetual secretary of the Academy of Science. He told an interviewer that he had never run and never lost his temper. The interviewer asked him if he had ever laughed. He said, "No, I have never made ha-ha." But he smiled. And so do all the other distinguished writers, philosophers, dramatists, and hostesses of the French 18th century. It seems to us shallow. We've got into deep water in the last 50 years. We feel that people ought to be more passionate, more convinced, or, as the current jargon has it, more committed. The smile of reason may seem to betray a certain incomprehension of the deeper human emotions, but it didn't preclude some strongly held beliefs. Belief in natural law, belief in justice, belief in toleration. Not bad. The philosophers of the Enlightenment pushed European civilization some steps up the hill. And in theory, at any rate, this gain was consolidated throughout the 19th century. Up to the 1930s, people were supposed not to burn witches and other members of minority groups, or extract confessions by torture, or pervert the course of justice, or go to prison for speaking the truth, except, of course, during wars. This we owe to the movement known as the Enlightenment, and above all, to Voltaire. Although the victory of reason and tolerance was won in France, it was initiated in England, and the French philosophers never concealed their debt to the country that, in a score of years, had produced Newton, Locke, and the bloodless revolution. When Voltaire visited England in the 1720s, it had enjoyed a quarter of a century of very vigorous intellectual life. And although Swift, Pope, and Addison might give and receive some hard knocks in print, they weren't physically beaten up by the hired gangs of offended noblemen or sent to prison for satirical references to the establishment. Both these things happened to Voltaire, and as a result, he took refuge in England in 1726. It was the age of the great country houses, and in 1722, the most splendid of all had just been completed for Marlborough. There it is, Blenheim Palace. A superb setting, but not everybody's idea of a pleasant country retreat. When Voltaire saw it, he exclaimed, "What a great heap of stone, without charm or taste." Well, it was built as a monument to military glory, and the architect, Sir John Vanbrugh, was a natural romantic, a castle builder, who didn't care a fig for good taste and classical decorum. '18th century England was the paradise of the amateur, by which I mean men rich enough and grand enough to do whatever they liked. who nevertheless did things that required a good deal of expertise. One of the things they chose to do was architecture. Wren began as a brilliant amateur, and although he made himself into a professional, he retained the amateur's freedom of approach to every problem. And two of his chief successors were amateurs by any definition. Sir John Vanbrugh wrote plays, but he also designed the vast and complicated structure of Blenheim. Lord Burlington was a connoisseur and a collector and arbiter of taste, the sort of character nowadays much despised. But he built this small masterpiece of domestic architecture, Chiswick. One may wonder how many professional architects today could handle these problems of design as expertly as Lord Burlington has done. These steps and colonnades look very imposing, but the building behind them is quite small, about the size of an old parsonage. In fact, Chiswick was not meant for day-to-day existence, but for social occasions, conversation, intrigue, political gossip, and a little music. Of course, it's only a miniature, kind of glorified drill box. Yet I don't feel that it's at all pinched or constricted. In a way, these 18th century amateurs were the inheritors of the Renaissance ideal of universal man. And it's significant that the typical universal man of the Renaissance, Alberti, had also been an architect. If we may still consider architecture to be a social art, an art by which men may be enabled to lead a fuller life, then perhaps the architect should touch life at many points and not be too narrowly specialized. 18th century amateurism ran through everything: chemistry, philosophy, botany and natural history. It produced men like the indefatigable Sir Joseph Banks, who refused to go on Captain Cook's second voyage because he wasn't allowed to have two horn players to make music for him during dinner. There was a freshness and a freedom of mind in these men that is entirely lost in the rigidly controlled classifications of the professional. And they were independent, with all the advantages and disadvantages to society that result from that condition. They wouldn't have fitted in to our modern utopia. I recently heard a professor of sociology say on television, "What's not prohibited must be made compulsory." Not a suggestion that would have attracted those eminent visitors, Voltaire and Rousseau, who drew inspiration from our philosophy and our institutions and our tolerance. But as usual, there was another side to this shining medal. And of this we have an exceptionally vivid record in the work of Hogarth.
The days of me youth I could be like a dove.
In the days of my youth he could be like a dove, like a sparrow at all times was ready for love. Little laddie, little laddie, la-la-la-la-la-la-la.
The life of all mortals in kissing should pass.
The life of all mortals in kissing should pass. Lip to lip while you're young and the lips of the glass. Little laddie, little laddie.
drinking, wenching, stealing, no more than today, I suppose, but rather more openly. All this coarse life is painted with great delicacy, and although Hogarth's compositions are rather a muddle, one can't deny that he had a gift of narrative invention. In later life, he did a series of pictures of an election that are easy to follow and a very convincing comment on the much cracked-up democracy of 18th century England. Here's the polling booth with imbeciles and moribunds being persuaded to make their marks. And an old soldier loyally voting for the establishment with his hook. And here's the successful candidate, like a fat, powdered capon, borne in triumph by his bruisers who are still carrying on their private feuds. And I must confess that Hogarth conquers my prejudice by this blind fiddler. A real stroke of imagination, outside the usual range of his moralizing journalism. The truth is, I think, that 18th century England, in the aftermath of its middle-class revolution, had created two societies very remote from one another. One was a society of modest country gentlemen, of which we have a perfect record in the work of a painter called Devis, comically stiff and expressionless in their cold, empty rooms. True, it developed into the world of Jane Austen, which was not lacking in critical intelligence, but was somewhat deficient in energy. The other was the urban society of which Hogarth has left us many records. Plenty of animal spirits, but not what we could call by any stretch civilization. I hope you won't think it too facile if I compare this print, called A Midnight Modern Conversation, with a picture painted in the same decade called A Reading from Molière by the French artist de Troyes. In this series, I've tried to go beyond the narrower meaning of the word civilized, but all the same, it has its value, and one can't deny that this is a picture of civilized life. Even the furniture contrives to be both beautiful and comfortable at the same time.